Hi, I'm Cassandra, and I have a pretty interesting presentation about my book that I chose, The Demon in the Freezer by Richard Preston. And I chose it because I wondered what was in my freezer that could be so dangerous. And to my surprise, this is not about finding anything in my freezer. I don't want to give away too much of the whole book, but to highlight a few key points, it jumps from anthrax to smallpox back to anthrax, which indicates how both of these substances are similar yet so different. This book also is written in a thriller mode where it connects a very real terrorist to using one of these substances as a bioweapon. And between different labs, following different countries, there's a few scientists whom work in these labs, and we go back in the past when smallpox had a major outbreak, which was quickly intervened, and then we snap to the present where postal workers are dropping dead from delivering letters containing anthrax. Those who work with emerging diseases in this story continue to work for the eradication of other diseases like Ebola and I'm not sure, but I know there was Ebola at least. Um, they try to understand the workings of anthrax because it is fairly new. And as a warning, this book does contain dead monkeys, PPE accidents, and vivid descriptions that doesn't let you want to put the book down. It might seem really gross, but my favorite part about this book was the vivid explanations of how smallpox attacks the body from the inside out. Um, One of these chapters, I believe it was on page 30, it describes a man who was in Germany and his town was hit by influenza. But after he had visited all the it was the industrial heart of Germany, which is one of the most industrialized countries in our world. And so he returned home and he felt achy, restless, and tired. And weeks later, he gained a fever, headaches, and he assumed it was hepatitis or typhoid fever, in which he goes to the hospital and he's pumped with tetracycline and excuse my language, chloramphenicol. Those don't seem to work, so his progression seemed to get worse with a sore throat and a very irritated esophagus. The book goes on to explain that particles of smallpox virus were steaming out oozy spots in the back of his mouth and mixing with his saliva, which causes infective droplets of the disease to spill out. Which sounds really gross, but it helps you understand exactly what smallpox does to you. 2 days later, Peter's whole body was red with pimples and it hurt. And until they became blisters, it burnt all over. They call this the centrifugal rash of smallpox. And it's got pustulating orifices that felt as if they would burst if he just even moved ever slightly. um, and unfortunately, with smallpox, you are still of sound mind, and he did receive his smallpox vaccine upon contracting the disease. However, they did not take, and he eventually died from smallpox. Uh, Another thing that was really interesting was that it spread through the hospital he was in like wildfire through the air vents. And that was just a little bit of the story, and it goes on to describe way more people with slightly different symptoms. And I think this book wanted to get the picture to people that even the smallest particles can be as destructive as the human condition itself. I was not able to make a connection with the book until a few weeks after reading it, when our own little pandemic began here. Um, Back in November, I came across the coronavirus, which had already presumably killed thousands in China. As the months went on, the US had not been worried about such an outbreak, but my family began preparing for the worst. And now I sit at home giving myself an education while the country is shut down over what is now called COVID-19. Um, I'm not really worried about this pandemic because I know I, I'd like to think that I know basic medical science, and there are definitely much worse diseases out there that could get me, like, for instance, smallpox. Um, so, after reading The Demon in the Freezer, I began questioning common sense medical science. For instance, why in the heck have they ceased half the world's population from going about their lives over a flu like virus? Why do we have empty hospitals when there is an emergent disease on the loose? There are are so many controversies about this COVID-19. We've been given countless narratives about who is most effective and who who to stay away from, and they're also saying that only those with a suppressed immune system get sick from COVID-19. But did we know that you can suppress your immune system by wearing a mask in public to begin with? It constricts the oxygen to your brain, or staying in your home without the sun's golden vitamin D soaking into your cells. Wonderful. The impact of this book may lead may lead other people to hopefully ask their own questions during this time of social distancing and staying safe. So I just wanted to reiterate that death causes fear because disease is unpredictable force that causes death. And death turns around to make us fearful. It's this giant loop within the human condition, and I believe disease is a natural process in which must evolve in order to be effective. So, if humans are constantly searching caves for new profound organisms, they're most likely going to come across something hidden that nearly wipes out any species without having any previous exposure. Um, I'm sure some of you are still wondering what anthrax is and why it is so deadly, and I wondered that myself too as I began reading this story. Anthrax is a single cell microorganism that grows explosively on the lymph and on blood. From our studies from biology, we should know that single cell bacteria means prokaryote. The book indicates that anthrax is known as a parasite that has a natural life cycle in hoofed animals. So what that means is it grows on spores. It's a seed, like a tiny capsule, and it can sit dormant in the dirt for many years. But then a hoofed animal, like a cattle or a donkey, will come by and be grazing and eat up that particle. And then it'll multiply in the animal's body and it'll turn into a rod shaped cell. And then it'll multiply. And they produce poison, which makes the host die in a matter of minutes, maybe days. And then the process will start all over again when the body starts to decay because the spores spill out and dry up, go back into the dirt. This relates to smallpox cell structure, whereas smallpox contains proteins on the surface and has a dumbbell core which holds the genome virus. I'd like to show you a picture, page 35. Here is what smallpox looks like. They have drawn it up for you, and they've used an electron microscope to show you. So here's the dumbbell shaped structure inside the proteins, and um, the smallpox is also a parasite that multiplies inside the body of its host, but it cannot function anywhere else. They are not alive, but they're not dead either, which seems to make it deadly at even the most smallest exposure. I do recommend this book to whoever would like to expand their biology knowledge, excuse me, into real life situations. As mentioned before, this book is a true story and describes so many deadly parts of science that is so scarily understanding. For example, when describing cytokines, I got a better understanding of exactly how to how they work without having to do extra research. As we recall, cytokines refer to the pus-filled stinky sacs that formulate all over smallpox infected body, and they release unknown proteins and they go wild, which unbalances the immune system, causing it to shut down. So, in a way, the understanding of all of that makes you want to continue reading this book and just exploring more of the darker side in science. And I believe if others read The Demon in the Freezer, they'll understand the title much better without reading the full book. And I believe also that they literally become keeping, excuse me, keeping vials of frozen variola and DNA in labs is pretty dangerous, and it's just waiting for humanity to come in and be a terrorist, decide what to do with it. Pretty scary. So that is my book presentation. Thank you.